From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
Yeah, doing okay. It's getting towards my bedtime. So I will do my best to keep my yawns to when I'm not talking.
Yeah, good idea. We do coordinate on an evening usually when we're connecting with East Coast US. So we are staying up late. So Joelle, we appreciate your flexibility.
Well, thank you, Jason. And I also appreciate your flexibility because you are also recovering from an illness.
Yeah, it's a good thing we rescheduled this when we did. But I think we're recording, I recorded one today actually. We've got this one, then we've got two more in the next 2 days. So hopefully I'm fully recovered by tomorrow. Lots on. But for listeners, lots of really great guests coming your way very shortly. But let's introduce our guest today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so her research examines how large-scale social change, work arrangements, and family dynamics intersect to shape socioeconomic and wellbeing outcomes over the life course. Her ongoing work investigates the impacts of remote and hybrid work on worker, organisational, and societal outcomes. She is an Associate Professor of Sociology at Boston College. Welcome to the podcast, Dr Wen Fan.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, thank you for getting up early. We're very pleased to have you on as well. We do always really love to get researchers on the podcast and have the opportunity to understand what's new and emerging in the research. So yeah, really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, I'm very excited to share our findings as well. And thank you for your flexibility for staying up late.
Oh, it's not actually that late. Jason likes to exaggerate my...
I've told you a million times to stop saying that. But I guess you're right, Joelle. It's great to have academics come on and talk about their research. I know we're going to be talking about Wen's publications, but we know that generally by the time it gets to publication, it's generally a couple of years old. So it'll be interesting to hear what she's working on. Beyond the what we've already read.
Sorry, before we get into that, Wen, what podcast do you like to listen to?
Right. So actually, because you sent me some of these interview questions beforehand, and I did spend some time thinking about these questions. And this question, I actually consider it to be the most difficult to answer, as I do listen to several podcasts daily. And in some ways, this question almost feels like asking a parent which child is your favorite. So I just mentioned two. And the first one is Chinese Mandarin podcast. I don't know how many of your listeners speak Mandarin, but this one is called 无人知晓, which translates to nobody knows in English. And it's kind of difficult to describe because at first it focused mostly on investment, but later it quickly expanded, or I should say deepened, to include topics such as self-awareness, Buddhism, personal development, and life in general. So that's the first one. And the second one is an English podcast called The Gray Area. And it sits at the intersection of philosophy, politics, and culture. And usually it features some in-depth conversations with some leading scholars, writers, or public intellectuals. And the topics are quite wide-ranging. Some focus on the very like existential questions that we are still facing today as human beings collectively speaking, and some are more pressing cultural and political trends. So as the name suggests, this podcast really invites listeners to move away from a black and white thinking to really begin to think on the gray areas of modern life, the complexity and the nuances of different phenomena we are facing today.
Very cerebral suggestions there, Wen. Nice. Can you tell us about your professional career, please?
Right. So as I mentioned to Jason just before the podcast, this actually marks my 10th year anniversary at Boston College. So I finished my PhD degree in sociology from the University of Minnesota first. And then I came to Boston College to first begin as an assistant professor and then promoted to associate professor a couple years ago. So there has been some change in terms of my research focus. So at the very beginning, for instance, on my dissertation, really focused on a particular historical event in China that's called the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which happened from 1966 to 1976, when a whole generation they lost the opportunity to continue their education in a usual pattern because colleges suspended regular admissions, and many youths were sent to rural areas to so-called be re-educated by the peasants. So I wanted to see the later life, the long-term health consequences of growing up during this tumultuous historical period. So that sort of captured my earlier research agenda to use these exogenous shocks or larger natural experiments to try to answer some of the key questions in social sciences, like the relationships between educational attainment or early life adversities and later life outcomes. But since the pandemic, there has been a change in my research agenda. So right now, I'm mostly focused on the future of work.
Yeah. Well, I guess the pandemic has certainly been a significant natural experiment too, and will be, I think, one of those significant turning points in history in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess there is a connection, with my previous work, because when the pandemic hit, I was really also trying to use the pandemic as a natural experiment to see some of the profound changes in how we work. So I have an ongoing project, for example, on remote and hybrid work. So that certainly was not necessarily precipitated, but definitely speed up by the pandemic. So we collected interview and survey data to understand the impacts of remote work for workers, job conditions, well-being, and their family and personal lives, and so on. So yeah, and another ongoing project I think will be the focus for today, and that is 40 work weeks. And I would say 40 work weeks to a great extent are also accelerated by the pandemic, because even though the broader idea of work time reduction was there many years ago, even well before the pandemic. But really, it was during the pandemic when we saw the great resignation, the quiet quitting in the U.S. and in many other Western countries, including, I think, Australia, that had motivated some companies to begin to think outside the box, to consider how to restructure the workplace in order to deal with the retention and hiring issues.
Yeah, so we are going to be talking about your research on the 4-day work week in particular, and you mentioned COVID. Were there any other drivers behind researching the condensed work week?
You mean for us to research on the 40 weeks in particular?
Yeah.
Right. So, so that is actually a quite interesting story, and I would say quite unique when you think about where projects start. So typically, it was out of some initial interests from researchers, but in this particular case, around in 2021. An NGO called 40 Week Global. So they have been organizing these trials that companies are doing. So they reached out to Julie Shaw, who is a colleague of mine at Boston College. She has done some of the pioneering and foundational work in long work hours and how that affects workers' well-being. So they reached out to her to study the effects of the trials they were planning to organize, because otherwise it would be a conflict of interest for organization to both organize the trials and to evaluate the effectiveness of the trials. So Julie, very kindly, she invited me to also join as a co-lead of the broader project, because I had also done some research in work and family related issues. So, and then together we have been collecting data from companies, from employees, to try to use different metrics to assess whether the trials are a success or a failure, and in what ways they are a success or a failure. So that has been our research agenda since the very beginning. And the paper we just published in Nature on Human Behavior, that was like the first paper out of this project. And we decided to focus on well-being in particular because, just a couple years ago, I think you all see this widespread discussion in the public about workers on stress and burnout are really at a record high level. And a lot of that was driven by for example, the shift to remote work, or the lockdown policies that really had exacerbated a lot of these issues. So we wanted to see whether by reducing work weeks from 5 days to 4 days, whether that would make a big difference. So, and previous studies also clearly established this link between long work hours and reduced well-being. So all of these factors combined together have led us to study well-being as the first outcome.
Yeah, and it makes sense, the timing of when you started the research with what was really topical at the time to consider, burnout and well-being. And I can tell you, in Australia, where there's a really big focus on psychosocial hazards and work, the link between work and mental health outcomes through legislation, your article in Nature did get a lot of press and a lot of attention, which is why it's great, to see that research actually make it beyond just a peer-reviewed publication and make it out to the general world, right?
Definitely. And that's one reason I really like this type of research. It's not just analyzing secondary data, but really to try to make a change in the real world to see what happens. And if successful, we can begin to think about how to promote or expand this model to different contexts. And another thing I would just want to add on to your point is that I do think like Australia, New Zealand, and Europe in general, they, you tend to have the more healthy, I guess, policy space to see workplaces as a fundamental cause of many of the mental health and stress and burnout issues we see in the broader society. Not so much in the US, unfortunately, speaking. So I do think that's one area that the US has a lot to learn from you guys.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We know our good friend, Dr. David Daniels, who runs the Psych Health and Safety podcast in the US. He's banging the drum, but it's going to be a long while, I think, before the US catches up, if ever. Definitely not under the current administration, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah, really interested in this, right? Because there's been a lot of talk before about the benefits of the 4-day work week. Your article obviously got published in a top tier journal. So yeah, really interested in the methodology that you deployed in this research.
Yeah, so the methodology is actually a little bit complex. So let me just try to get started, and feel free to interrupt me whenever there is any confusion. But in general, we have collected survey and interview data from both employees and companies. So let me just say a few words about employees first. So from employees, we do a longitudinal survey data collection, and that consists of several waves. So about 2 weeks before the trials start, they receive a email to their home, to their work email address that invite them to complete a baseline survey to try to establishing what happened before the trials. And then about 3 months into the trial, they got another survey, a relatively short one, just a few key well-being indicators and a detailed time diary, which is because we want to see how workers actually spend the day off. And at the end of the 6-month trial, they got this endpoint survey link, such that we can compare differences between baseline and endpoint. But there is since the very beginning, we have this concern that perhaps some of the effects we see are just due to some novelty effects, some initial excitement or enthusiasm, and these effects could quickly just go away after the trials end. So that's why even after the end of the trial, we decide to continue collecting data. So up to this point, we have been collecting data at 12 months and 18 months. And we are still debating whether it makes sense to keep collecting, doing those very long follow-ups, because as you might have guessed, the retention rate gets reduced to a considerable degree once you go beyond 12 months. So this leads to the broader question of selectivity: who keeps responding to these surveys and who is really sticking around.
When I'm interested in how many people started with the first surveys and how much you've retained through to 18 months.
Yeah, so in the very beginning, I believe we sent the survey link. I need to check the actual numbers, but in terms of the retention rate by 6 months, it's about 75%. That's actually quite normal when you compare this with the industry standard or typical panel survey. That's about at that rate. And by about 12 months, I would say it's about 50% or something like that. And 18 months, it's even fewer. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it does, gets declined fairly quickly.
Yeah. And did you did these organizations just adopt a 4-day work week, or did they do any preparation before changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should have, I will answer this question first and just mention another point I want to make. So, before the trials start, they typically companies go through a 3-month preparation period. So this was the period when they go to these training sessions organized by 40 Week Global. And sometimes it's some companies who had already finished these trials, they share with them their experiences. And because typically companies go through trials together in a cohort, so they also have a lot of opportunities to discuss with each other their challenges or the strategies they plan to adopt. So these are a 3-month preparation period. I do think is critical, and it's kind of the magic source on why or how the 40-week can actually get implemented successfully. So that's to your question. But another thing I want to mention before we get to other parts of the study is that just want to make clear what we mean by 40 weeks, because it can mean different things for different people. So there are 2 key requirements for participation in the trials. First is income or earnings have to be maintained at 100%, so no income reductions. And the second requirement is that there has to be genuine reduction in work hours. So it's not, for example, just cramming 5 days worth of work into 5 days, 40 hours from 5 days onto 4 days. So it's not a conventional compressed work week. So for most companies, they managed to reduce work hours by 20%. So from 40 hours to about 32 hours. Though there is some variability because some places might start at a very high level, so they are unable to do this full 20% reduction. But in order to truly participate in the trials, you have to reduce hours somehow. So that's a second point I want to make. And a third point is that there is also this implicit or sometimes explicit expectation from the trial companies that their employees should maintain their output at the pre-trial level. So no reduction in output. And when you do the math, obviously your productivity, your efficiency has to improve somehow. So, say if you should, before the trial, you produce 5 episodes per week. Now you still need to get the 5 episodes done, even though you now work only on 4 days. So this leads to the concern, actually, that this participating in the trials might actually make things worse, because now you might need to do things very fast, responding to emails very fast, and this general speed up of work processes, which could increase burnout and stress rather than reduce it. So I want to mention this in particular because, one common feedback we get from reporters, and sometimes when we present the paper in academic conferences, is that so now you work 4 days and you get 100% pay. Of course, your well-being will improve because, what else could have happened? But before we actually saw the results, I do think that it could go either way.
Yeah, that's really key to mention, right? So yeah, it's 100% of pay, but we expect the same level of productivity going from 5 to 4 days. So what were the key things that companies did then to give people time to still be that productive? How did they give their time back so they didn't have to feel rushed?
Yeah, so different companies do this differently, and we also have a fairly diverse sample in terms of industry and like a sector and occupation. But in general, I would say that there are a couple of things that that have been commonly adopted. One is to cut meetings, those unnecessary meetings, and not just on the absolute number of meetings, but on the length of the meetings. So do we have to, have a 1 hour meeting rather than just a 45 or 30-minute meeting? And also to think very carefully on who needs to be in the meeting. Does it really have to be involving the whole team, or just a couple of people is sufficient? So that turns out to be the most commonly adopted strategy by companies to try to maintain productivity. A second commonly used strategy is to try to optimize the workflow as much as possible, to really have a deep think about the whole process you do your job, and which step doesn't really add much value to the final output. So just to get rid of those low value tasks that could help with productivity. So a third thing I would say is to adopt some new technologies, especially in recent years. We have seen this quick expansion and the development of AI tools. So that have been used by some companies like PR firms to help with work process.
Yeah, and generally you don't have to do too much consultation with workers for them to kind of point out where all the hindrance demands are, and where they're wasting time. If you ask most people, they'd actually prefer to be doing their job than attending meetings or doing administrative tasks. That's just busy work.
Or doing workarounds to deal with poorly implemented change.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was just reading some interview we did with a CEO at a 40-week company, and they said, so the CEO said that they before the trials begin, they had this all staff meeting, and then try to find out ideas or ways to improve productivity. And he mentioned this number that 90% of the ways they eventually adopted or used come from employees. So they, as the frontline workers, they really have a pretty good idea on how we could get the work done better.
Yeah, and it's something we commonly reiterate on this podcast. And I remember even Sir Kerry Cooper asked, he's a very knowledgeable person around intervention. He also would say, consult with your workers because they're the subject matter experts on what they do.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another reason we also have collected this measurement about how the decision-making process looks like. Is it more of a top-down or bottom-up? Do you involve your, ordinary workers when you decide on what to do? So even though for this particular well-being outcome, we don't find this metric to be particularly significant, but for some other performance metrics or other outcomes, I think it could make a big difference.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So tell us what you found.
Yeah. So there are three findings. The first finding is that we just before that, I think I really should have mentioned that in addition to data collection from trial companies, we also collected the data from control companies. So we managed to recruit 12 control companies in the US. They are sort of comparable to trial companies in the sense that they got interested in the idea because they participated in the information sessions organized by 40 Week Global. But later, for various reasons, they decided not to participate in the trials. But still, they are quite generous, allowing us to survey their workers over a 6-month period so that we could see what happened to those companies that did not go through the trials. And the first finding is really to compare what happened in well-being between the trial companies and the control companies. So we looked at 4 indicators of well-being: burnout, job satisfaction, mental health, and physical health. And across all of these 4 metrics, we see very clear evidence that well-being improved for employees in the trial companies. And for employees in the control companies, basically nothing changed. So there is a very clear contrast between the two settings that allows us to say something more robust or more, to make a causal inference in some way. So that is the first major finding. And the second finding is to identify this sometimes epidemiologists call a dose response pattern. So in this case, is that the more that you are able to, the more hours you are able to reduce, the greater the gains in well-being. So even though on average the reduction in work hours is about 20%, but there is some diversity or variation across workers. And we found that those who are able to reduce their hours by 8 tend to receive the greatest well-being benefits, followed by those who are only able to reduce by 5 to 7, for example, and so on. So very clear gradient. And the third finding is about the why. So we see this well-being benefits, but what have caused these well-being benefits? We examined a wide range of work-related and life-related possible mechanisms, and 3 factors stand out as the most significant explanations. One is reduced fatigue, and second is reduced sleep problems. And I think these 2 are easy to understand. You can see that why they get improved and in turn improve well-being. But the third one is improvement in work ability. So that's basically compared to your lifetime best. How would you rate your current workability? How capable do you see yourself as a worker? And in this case, we see this sort of win-win situation because workers now see they are better at performing their jobs, partly because of the work reorganization process we just talked about. They are now more capable, more effective, and this in turn improved their well-being. So in this case, it's improvement in both productivity and in well-being.
No follow-ups, Joelle? You're just blown away.
I guess I was having questions and then you answered the questions while you were still talking. So I guess I was wondering whether there was potentially, like with the control companies, if they had actually done the reorganization, which, you know, could potentially be part of the explanation. But if you're saying that there's also the dose response there anyway, so the companies that had done the reorganization but had a less significant reduction didn't see the same degree of improvement. So that kind of explained my question, I think.
Just one thing to clarify. So the control companies, they didn't go through the work reorganization process. They just, I think, some leadership from these companies, they were excited about the idea initially, so they sent someone to participate in the information sessions, but that's all of their involvement in the 40-week trials. So no actual, reorganization.
And when you're talking about the dose response, did you say the second largest gains was 8% drop in work hours versus 25%? Did I hear that right?
It's 8-hour reduction in work hours. So yeah, it's not in terms of percentage. So I think we have 4 groups. Those who reduced by 8 or more hours, 5 to 7 hour reduction, and 1 to 4 hour reduction, and those who either maintain their hours or actually increase their hours. We do have about like 20% of the sample who, for whatever reason, were not able to reduce their hours in any way. So these workers tend to be the worst in terms of their well-being outcomes.
Yeah. Did anyone manage to reduce it by 50%?
Actually, I think perhaps we have a couple there. As I mentioned, there is a wide spread in terms of the actual distribution. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone reduced by 50% or even more.
But not a large enough sample to say conclusively that the 2.5-day work week is best.
No, not at this moment. But it's interesting because one reviewer asked a question, along a similar line, that whether it's necessarily better that you just get hours reduced, and eventually you don't have to work at all. And to that question, I think definitely we need more data to evaluate that. But just based on previous literature, we do think that there might be a nonlinear relationship between work hours and well-being. It could be even worse if you don't work at all, because we do see, people, for example, who do not have a paid job, even if that's their voluntary choice, could lead to some problems, a lack of a sense of a lack of meaning, or just don't have a quite structured day, and so on. So so I don't want our research to be interpreted that we are promoting a model that eventually we don't work at all. But when we think about the number of hours we do spend on a daily basis, that is a lot. So, and I would even argue that our sample is not even like the most burnout workers, because at the baseline, they started out at 40 hours, and that's a regular, normal work week. So as I mentioned, I'm from China, and in China, we have this so-called 996 system that you work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. So that is really basically leaves nothing for your personal life, for your family and leisure activities. So that is quite a different story.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's always good to have that perspective, right? So beyond the wellbeing impacts, did your research explore any other outcomes, so business outcomes, for example, like financial or productivity impacts, or is that still to be published?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have collected data from companies. Sometimes it's in the form of revenue and in terms of turnover on hiring, personal and sick days. So those types of metrics. So before I talk about the initial findings, I just want to mention two complexities on here. First is that we do have a quite diverse sample, as I mentioned, that on these some conventional professional services sectors, but some are manufacturing, construction firms, and restaurants, and so on. So it's just difficult to come up with a standardized metric to compare across these very different jobs and sectors. So that's just one thing to mention. And the second thing to mention is that there could be this potential seasonality complexity we need to deal with, because trials are 6 months in duration. So we could easily, when you begin and when you end, it could be very different environment just in terms of the general climate. So these are two things really have complicated the, to help us to get a more robust conclusion for what happens to companies. Having said that, we did do some initial assessment, just doing a fairly simple pre-post comparison for each company to see what happened. And we don't see any evidence that they are performing worse. In most cases, actually, their revenue increased, turnover reduced, and personal and sick days reduced. So it's all improving in the expected direction, or at least it does not decline. So that's one thing I want to mention. And another thing I want to mention is that I do feel that in addition to looking at these perhaps more objective metrics or more specific metrics, it might be worthwhile to look at the decision companies make in terms of whether they want to continue with the trials or not. Because if they are truly happy with the trials, obviously they want to do it in the future, and vice versa. And using that metric, we do feel that this is largely a success story, because 90% of the companies have decided to continue with the trial, keep 4 days a week. So these give us some encouragement that perhaps there is something about 40 weeks that not only benefit workers, but also businesses as well.
I'm interested, given the low rate of companies that decided not to continue following the study. Did you get any qualitative information from them regarding why they decided not to continue?
Yeah, so we have collected some information from the companies. And these are just anecdotal evidence, so it's not systematic. So I would say that the reasons are quite random. It's not pointing to a systematic or structural solution, I guess. So for example, for some companies, they didn't do the work reorganization process quite well. So when they entered the trials, they didn't feel quite prepared to begin with, and really affected their later performance. And for some other companies, they were still trying to figure out whether the improvements they saw is due to 40 weeks or due to some general environmental change at the macro level, right? So perhaps during the 6 month trial, economy also happens to pick up. So you can't at a particular company level to distinguish these alternative explanations. So they were kind of trying to be more conservative, go back to the 5-day work weeks. And there is another company that I think is just so happens that it's a relatively small NGO, and they were dealing with a lot of turnover, and a few employees happen to be like on maternity leave at the same time. So they are really struggling with staff shortage, so they have no choice but to go back to 5 days. But as I mentioned, these are just really company by company specific reasons, not really some common issues that are affecting all of these places.
So, what action would you love to see happen as a result of your research?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I do think this a lot, and obviously we would like to see more trials involving more companies. So one limitation of the current study is that we do have an overrepresentation of small and medium-sized companies. This will obviously limit our generalizability. So we do want to have larger companies to participate. This not only will help with generalizability, but also it could potentially make it feasible to do like a group randomized trials. So in this study, we have control groups, but it's not a randomized trial. So if we do have a larger company, we could randomize their different divisions or departments into 5 days versus 4 days and see what actually happened. And given their common organizational culture, structure, and climate, this makes even stronger causal inference more likely. So that's one thing. Another thing that I would like to mention is that I do want to see more policy support in this direction, because many companies they participated in 40 weeks during the pandemic to deal with retention and hiring issues. When the workers really are at the have had the upper hand, but now the economy has changed in a very different way. So, we have seen a lot of rumors and even actual layoffs and so on. So companies, they now do not feel the urgency to try some novel ways like 40 weeks to address some of the issues they face. So in this climate, then I think policy support and financial incentives, for example, tax benefits, might be good ways to encourage more companies to voluntarily participate in the trials. So the government has a more active role to play in this direction. That's one direction that I do want to see more government involvement in the 40-week or work time reduction efforts.
Well, we do have the premier of one of our state governments here in Australia is trying to introduce a law to mandate a 4-day work week. So yeah, there's definitely some of them are thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen like in other places, we also have these government funded or at least supported or sponsored trials that, but as I mentioned, it's primarily in Europe or Australasia regions rather than the US. So we definitely have a long way to catch up.
Yeah, it depends on who's in power, right? We've got a Labor government here in Australia at the moment, which is very pro-worker. And I wouldn't say that would be the same of the US administration. Well, one of the questions that we like to ask all our guests at this point in the podcast, it's been a fascinating conversation with you so far, but what are the hopes for the future? What are your hopes, I should say, for the future of workplace mental health?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple ways to think about this question. So my hope, but broadly speaking, I think my hope is to that our workplace mental health will move from being treated as a side issue to being seen as more central to how we think about work, how we think about mental health related issues. So one class I teach on this semester is introductory sociology for pre-med students. And we just finished a discussion on the so-called sociological imagination. So this is really to encourage us to move beyond just individual fixes to seeking more structural fixes to certain social issues. And I think that is essentially a lot of the issues we are facing today, that we see many employers or workplace leaders, they are happy to give their employees, for example, a resilience training or some yoga sessions that try to fix individuals as a way to help resolve their stress and burnout, which I think is good. It could help some employees, but at least based on our research, perhaps a more fruitful and productive way to think about these burnout and mental health issues is to really see workplace as the fundamental cause, as the root cause of a lot of these problems. And in our case, when companies begin to think structurally to try to reorganize how work is done and can be done, in this case, reduce work weeks, then workers' well-being improved as a result. And they also, companies also benefit in terms of productivity, in terms of sometimes revenue and turnover as a result. So just to think broadly. And another aspect that I forgot to mention, but I do think is important, is that it's not just benefiting employees and employers, but it's also benefiting the broader society as well. So when we think about a lot of the gender inequality, racial inequality issues, a lot of this has to do with how work time is imagined and who is doing the overwork, who is doing the most dirty and tedious jobs. So if we can reimagine or reorganize the workplace in a more equal and egalitarian way, that will help that as well. And another issue is environmental and climate outcomes. And that's actually on some, we have on some ongoing research papers about the environmental impacts of 40 weeks, right? Because if you now work one day less, then perhaps you will spend less time on the road and eventually helping the environment in some way.
When that is quite the wish list. I mean, Joelle has accused me of being a violent optimist, but I think we've hit a new level there. Look, I really hope, though, that, talking to us, you get a perception of what the future could be in the US, in that there is a really growing wave of, I guess, unilateral support or admission that work is a social determinant of mental health. And it's not just along the individual, right? Work does fundamentally affect people's mental health, either for good or for bad. And that's something that that's been the probably largest thing to change in people's mindsets with this move away from a well-being or wellness and self-care culture. When we talk about perks provided to employees, versus going, no, actually, there's fundamentally something wrong with the systems of work or the design of work.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I do feel that sometimes doing this type of work is a little bit frustrating, because I just think my audience are these two groups of people: either those who get it, which I don't really need to convince them to do anything, and those who don't get it and refuse to listen to what we find. So my hope is that there is those third group of people who are kind of on the margin, and if our research and the podcast you are doing, which I really appreciate, the work you have been doing to promote the idea of this structural fix of mental health issues. If these kinds of work could help move those on the margin a little bit towards seeing mental health as a structural issue, as that require a structural solution, that would really make my day, I think.
Yeah, we and Dr. David Daniels will do the best we can.
Yeah.
No, there are always people who are inching towards a change of perspective. So these sorts of research initiatives and gathering that evidence certainly helps to move them along. Yeah. All right. Last question for you today, Wen. Do you have any words of advice for listeners who want to work in this field of psychological health and safety or workplace mental health?
Yeah, this is kind of in line with we already mentioned, that I just think don't underestimate the impact you can have. And I also think it's the perfect timing right now that on one hand, we have seen a lot of mental health issues that have a source in the workplace. But on the other hand, this also gives us an opportunity to think about innovative ideas or those new solutions that could help solve these problems in a creative way and in a structural way. So I think this field is quickly evolving, which means that we have a lot of room for improvement, for fresh energy, and for new ideas, innovation in general. So, for all of these reasons, I do feel this is a good time to enter the field and to contribute your part. But no matter what you decide, just stay curious, stay persistent, and keep pushing the boundaries. Let's together move the workplace towards a more healthy, productive, and humane and more meaningful direction.
Wonderful words of advice.
Thank you.
Well, Wen, it's been fantastic having you on. Like I said, it was quite a popular piece of research that did the rounds, so really great to have the original author or one of them on the podcast to talk about their fantastic work. And kudos again, because I know Nature is a very well regarded publication as well. So not just any journal, it is a top tier journal.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the words, and I really appreciate the questions, which some of these questions have also prompted me to think about possible new papers in the future. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, really great having you on, and we'll definitely put a link to your research in the show notes as well. So thanks for coming on. Thanks, Harry. I'm really crashing now, Joelle.
You need to go to bed, Jason.
It's time for bed, yeah. So, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video with our guests. So if you do want to check out any of the previous podcast episodes that we've done on video, you can check them out on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take snippets, the best bits of these conversations, and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So for those of you with a shorter attention span like me, that might be the place for you to go. And while you're on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with Joelle and myself, and even Wen, who has been very gracious with her time today. So that's it for today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.